The data file had been sitting on the table for 11 minutes before anyone touched it. It was a thin silver disk, the kind the Galactic Survey Commission used for high-priority mission briefings. Standard issue. Nothing special about its size or its weight. But none of the 4 alien crew members in the briefing room of the survey vessel Pale Margin had reached for it. They all sat around the circular table, arms folded or tucked in, eyes glancing at the disk and then glancing away, the way someone might look at a spider on the wall and pretend they had not noticed it. Darren Cole picked it up, turned it over once, and slotted it into the reader without a word. The room filled with a slow blue projection. A planet turned in the center of the table, green and brown, and wrapped in white cloud bands. Varith 6. Class M biosphere, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, temperate zones across 40% of the surface. Excellent soil composition. Remarkable water table. By every measure, the kind of planet the Commission loved to survey and catalog. Then the projection highlighted a region on the northern continent. A vast forest, dark green from orbit, dense and old. The system tagged it automatically, the same tag it had carried in every database for the last 400 years. Forbidden Zone Biological Hazard All Species Advisory, Do Not Enter. Quell, the science liaison, made a low sound in the back of his throat. He was Thalvari, tall and thin with 4 arms and a set of sensory whiskers that twitched constantly when he was anxious. Right now they were moving like grass in a storm. Perhaps we should review the perimeter objectives again, he said. The atmospheric sampling can be completed from the edge. There is no need to enter the forest itself. Commander Pale, who sat at the head of the table, did not respond right away. She was also Thalvari, older, with whiskers gone gray at the tips and a long career behind her. She had read the briefing file twice before the meeting. She had the look of someone who had made a decision they were not entirely comfortable with. The Commission wants ground-level botanical samples, she said. Not perimeter readings. Ground level. That means inside the treeline. Brat, the security officer, made a noise that was the Garundian equivalent of a deeply unhappy laugh. He was broad and heavy, with 6 thick fingers on each hand and a face like a wall. Inside, he repeated. Inside the Forbidden Beast Forest. Right. Just inside the edge, Pale said. No more than 100 meters. Tell that to the team from the Moravian Survey Group, Brat said. They went 30 meters in. 30. We still have their last sensor log. It stops mid-sentence. The room went quiet. Civi, the mission archivist, was already pulling up reference files on a small pad. She was Yolani, slight and translucent-skinned, and she clicked faintly with her jaw when her nerves were high. She was clicking a great deal right now. I have documented 61 recorded attempts to survey the Forbidden Beast Forest, she said. Going back to the first landing on Varith 6, 407 years ago. Of those 61 teams, 43 turned back at the perimeter without entering. 18 crossed the treeline. She paused. None of the 18 reached the 100-meter mark. Darren had been quiet through all of this. He was sitting back in his chair with his arms crossed, reading the projected data with the expression of someone working through a mildly interesting problem. He was human, which meant he was shorter than the Thalvari by a full head and a half, and built in a way that Quell had once described as compact and improbably relaxed. His brown hair was slightly too long for regulation, and his jacket had a small tear near the left shoulder that he had never bothered to repair. He had been on the Pale Margin for 2 months. The alien crew had grown used to him, but not always sure what to make of him. Can I see the creature logs? He asked. Civi hesitated, then transferred the files to his side of the display. Darren leaned forward and read in silence for several minutes. Nobody interrupted him. The hum of the ship's engines filled the room. Then he sat back again. These are animals, he said. Quell's whiskers stopped moving. I beg your pardon. The creatures in the logs. The descriptions. The behavior patterns. Darren gestured at the projection. Territorial megafauna, ambush predators, pack hunters, avian swarm species. These are animals. They're doing what animals do. They are doing what animals do to survey teams, Brat said flatly. Because survey teams walk into their territory making loud noises and pointing instruments at them, Darren said. He did not say it like an argument. He said it like he was reading from a manual. Look at this one. The Moravian team report. They used sonic deterrent equipment the moment they saw movement in the brush. Wideband noise emitter. High frequency. He glanced around the table. Do you know what a wideband high-frequency noise emitter sounds like to an animal that uses low-frequency resonance for communication? Nobody answered. It sounds like a declaration of war, Darren said, from something they've never seen before. Something that doesn't smell like prey and doesn't look like anything in their experience. And it's screaming at them. He closed the file. I'd charge too. Commander Pale studied him for a moment. You seem very certain for someone who has never been to this planet. I haven't been to this planet, Darren agreed. But I grew up on Earth. We had things like this. All of these, more or less. Territorial boar-type animals, resonance hunters, apex predators with threat displays, swarm species. He paused. We learned. Your world's creatures are domesticated, Quell said carefully. Some of them. The ones we domesticated, yes. The rest we just figured out how to exist next to. Darren shrugged. It took us a long time, and a lot of people got hurt doing it. But we got there. Brott leaned forward. And you believe you can walk into that forest. I believe I can walk into the edge of that forest, collect the botanical samples the Commission wants, and walk back out. He paused. With appropriate precautions. What precautions? Pale asked. Darren thought about it. Move slowly. Don't make sudden sounds. Don't act like prey, and don't act like a threat. Read the environment before you step into it. He looked around the table. And pack enough food to last the day. You don't want to be hungry and distracted in there. There was a silence. Food, Brott said. Lunch, Darren confirmed. I'll make sandwiches. Later that evening, when the rest of the crew had gone to their quarters, Civvy passed the ship's small kitchen and stopped in the corridor. She looked in through the open panel. Darren was at the counter, carefully assembling sandwiches from the human food stores, wrapping each one in a cloth and packing them into a worn field bag alongside his survey equipment and a small notebook. He was humming something quietly to himself. Civvy stood there for a moment, then lifted her recording pad and made a note in the archive. She did not know what category to file it under. She wrote, Human crew member is preparing for tomorrow's surface mission with apparent calm. No elevated stress indicators. Is making food. She looked at it for a moment, then added, This may be the most unusual thing I have recorded in 11 years of field work. She closed the pad and walked away. In the morning, the shuttle began its descent toward Varith 6, and the great dark shape of the Forbidden Beast Forest spread across the northern continent below them like a secret the planet had been keeping for a very long time. The old survey marker was barely visible beneath the moss. It stood at the edge of the tree line like a forgotten apology, a metal pole driven into the ground by whatever team had come here 80 years ago and decided that this was as far as any reasonable being should go. The paint was long gone. The engraved text was pitted and soft with weather, but the meaning was still clear. Someone had stood exactly here, looked at what lay ahead, and chosen to leave a marker instead of taking another step. Darren crouched beside it and brushed the moss away from the base. He could just make out the survey commission stamp and a date 4 generations old. He straightened up and looked at the forest. It did not look like a place of terror. It looked like a forest. The trees were enormous, old in the way that meant centuries of undisturbed growth, their trunks wider than the shuttle they had landed in. The canopy was so high that the light coming through it arrived thin and amber, the color of late afternoon even at mid-morning. The ground beneath was layered in soft growth, ferns and low trailing plants, and the kind of deep leaf fall that muffled footsteps entirely. It smelled like earth and water and something faintly sweet that Darren could not identify. He found it beautiful. Behind him, the 4 alien crew members had gathered in a loose group near the shuttle, approximately 2 meters from the marker and no closer. Quell had his scanner out, but was holding it at his side rather than raising it. Brott had one hand resting on his sidearm with the casual firmness of someone who intended to leave it there. Commander Pale was looking at the canopy. Civvy was recording, her pad held up, her jaw clicking at a steady rhythm. The perimeter reads clear, Quell said. His voice was controlled. No immediate movement signatures within 40 meters. Good, Pale said. We advance to the marker. Collect atmospheric readings. Then we assess. They reached the marker. Quell raised his scanner. Brott stayed half a step behind and to the right, watching the tree line. Darren walked past the marker and stood at the actual edge of the forest, where the open ground met the first line of trees, and looked up into the canopy. That was when the sound began. It came from above and from everywhere at once, a high, layered ringing that was halfway between wind chimes and breaking glass. It filled the air and rose, and then the canopy above them moved. Not like wind moves it. Like something inside it was moving, thousands of somethings, shifting and lifting all at the same time. The canopy drifters came out of the upper branches in a wave. There were thousands of them. Each one was roughly the size of a large crow, but built differently, with wide flat wings that were edged in crystal feathers that caught the amber light and scattered it in every direction. They moved together, the whole mass of them turning and banking as one body, a rolling shape that folded and opened and folded again, and the sound they made was constant and sharp and filled the bones. Quell stumbled backward. Brot had his weapon raised before he had even finished turning. Commander Pale grabbed Civi's arm and pulled her back toward the shuttle. "Retreat," Pale said, sharp and clear. "Back to the shuttle. Now." Darren did not retreat. He lowered himself slowly to the ground and sat down on a flat rock at the edge of the treeline, the way someone might sit down to watch a river. He set his field bag beside him, opened it, took out one of the wrapped sandwiches, and unwrapped it. Then he looked up at the birds and held very, very still. "Cole," Brot said, his voice low and tight. "Get away from the treeline." Darren did not answer. He took a bite of his sandwich. The birds banked overhead. The ringing sound rose. They were tightening their formation, compressing into a denser shape, the way starlings do when they feel threatened, packing together because together they look larger, more dangerous, harder to attack. Darren watched the shape of them and recognized what he was seeing. Not aggression. Panic defense. A mass of animals that were frightened and making themselves look big. He chewed his sandwich and looked slightly to the left of the formation, not directly at it, not challenging anything with eye contact. Brot grabbed his comm unit. "Commander, the human is sitting at the treeline and eating." "I can see that," Pale said from near the shuttle. "Darren, please explain what you were doing." "Waiting," Darren said quietly. "Give it a few minutes." The birds circled twice more. The ringing sound peaked, and then, gradually, like a tide going out, it began to drop. The formation loosened. The individual birds stopped pressing so close together. The sharp beating of crystal wings slowed. And then, over the next 3 or 4 minutes, they drifted back into the upper canopy in groups of 10 and 20 and 50, settling back into the branches with a soft, fading chime. The amber light came back. The forest went quiet. Darren finished his sandwich, wrapped the cloth neatly, and put it back in the bag. He turned and looked at the alien crew, for faces staring at him from near the shuttle. Brot still had his weapon half raised. Quell's whiskers were pressed flat. Civi had not stopped recording. "Defensive bunching," Darren said, as if continuing a conversation that had been paused. "They're not hunters. Avian species that size and formation density are responding to perceived threat, not looking for a meal. When we came out of the shuttle and walked straight toward the treeline, we triggered a threat response. The noise and the flocking was them making themselves look as dangerous as possible to drive us off." He stood up and brushed off his jacket. "Once I sat down and stopped moving and stopped looking at them directly, the signal changed. We stopped looking like a threat. They settled." Commander Pale walked back to the marker. She looked at him for a long moment. "And if they had attacked anyway?" "Crystal feathers are a deterrent display first," Darren said. "Same principle as a pufferfish or a mantis shrimp. They show you the weapon before they use it. If the display works, they don't have to fight." He picked up his field bag. "They really didn't want to fight us. They just wanted us to go away." Sitting down told them we weren't coming at them. Quell had lowered his scanner and was now raising it again, this time taking actual readings. His whiskers uncurled slowly. "The atmospheric content inside the treeline," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, become more careful and curious than afraid. "The readings are extraordinary. Spore density, pollen composition. If the botanical samples match these readings, then we need to go in and get them," Pale said. She looked at the forest. Then she looked at Darren. "You first," she said. Darren walked to the treeline and stopped. He crouched and looked at the ground just inside the first trees. He stayed there for a moment, studying the soil and the vegetation and a long set of deep parallel gouges running across the exposed root of a large tree. The wood was raw and fresh where the bark had been stripped away. Something with significant force behind it had done that recently. He stood up. Root boar territory, he said. See these gouges? That's marking. The animal scrapes bark to mark range boundaries. He studied the direction the marks were facing. But look at the angle. These marks face outward, toward us. The animal was moving away from the forest center when it made them. It's deeper in. He looked at the sky through the canopy. And based on the time of day, it's probably resting. Probably, Brat said. Animals are predictable, Darren said. That's the part everyone forgets. They're not random. They follow patterns. Once you know the pattern, you know what to expect. He stepped over the root and into the forest. The amber light fell over him. The smell of earth and sweet growth was stronger inside, layered and deep. He took 3 steps and turned and waited. Quell came next, scanner raised. Then Civi, still recording. Then Commander Pale. Brat was last, weapon holstered now, but hand still near it, eyes moving constantly across the undergrowth. They were inside the Forbidden Beast Forest. They had gone further than 43 survey teams that had come here before them, simply by one person sitting down and eating a sandwich. Darren walked ahead slowly, reading the ground, reading the air, reading the light between the trees. Behind him, Civi's recording pad hummed softly, and her jaw had stopped clicking for the first time all day. The forest floor told stories if you knew how to read them. Darren walked slowly, not because he was afraid, but because fast movement was noise and noise was information you were broadcasting without meaning to. He watched the ground ahead of him the way you watch water for current, reading the bent stems and the disturbed leaf fall and the faint impressions in the soft earth. The forest had a rhythm to it, a deep, slow pulse of sound that was birds at distance and insects close and wind moving through the upper canopy far above. He listened to that rhythm the way a person listens to a familiar song, waiting for the note that does not belong. Behind him, the alien crew moved in a loose line. Quell was taking continuous readings and had stopped making sounds of distress, replacing them with the quiet murmur of technical observation. Civi recorded everything. Commander Pale watched the treeline on all sides with the careful patience of someone who had many years of difficult field experience. Brat watched everything Pale did not, and also watched Darren, which he had not entirely stopped doing since the incident with the birds. They had crossed the 100-meter line 10 minutes ago. They were now at roughly 160 meters, further than any recorded team from the last 4 centuries. Darren stopped. He held up a hand, and the line behind him stopped with him. He did not turn around. He was looking to the left, into a section of dense brush about 8 meters away. The brush was still, but something about the stillness was wrong. It was too deliberate, a stillness with weight behind it, the kind that comes when a large thing decides very suddenly to stop moving. Don't move, Darren said quietly, and don't make any sound. He did not move either. He just waited, watching the brush with relaxed eyes, not staring, not focusing, just keeping it in his vision the way you keep a shadow in your peripheral. 3 seconds. 5. 10. The brush exploded. The root boar came through it like a thrown boulder. It was the size of a large domestic bull, but lower to the ground, built wide and dense with short, powerful legs and a skull that was plated in layered bone that made it look like something designed specifically to hit other things with. Its eyes were small and red-brown and fixed directly on the nearest moving shape, which happened to be Quell, who had made a very small involuntary noise when the animal appeared. Quell leapt sideways. Brat shouted something. Commander Pale pulled Civi back 3 steps. Darren stepped to the right. Not away from the boar, not toward it, just to the right, smoothly, about 2 meters, so that he was no longer in the direct line of the animal's charge. The boar thundered past him close enough that he could feel the displaced air and the vibration in the ground through his boots. It did not adjust its path. It had committed to a direction, and that direction was now empty. The boar stopped 6 meters past him, digging into the leaf fall with all 4 feet, and turned its enormous head around to find what it had charged at. It was breathing hard through its broad, flat nostrils. Its skull plates were flexed forward, a display posture, making itself look larger and more armored. Darren reached into his field bag and took out the second sandwich. He broke off a large piece from the end, the thick part with more filling, and tossed it in a gentle underarm throw into the brush well to the left of where the boar was standing. The piece landed with a small soft sound in the leaf fall, and the boar's head swiveled toward it immediately. The animal took one step toward the smell, then another, then put its nose to the ground and snuffled loudly at the food. Within 30 seconds, the boar had found the sandwich piece, eaten it, and was moving away through the brush in a different direction, no longer interested in the group at all. Darren watched it go. Then he looked at what was left of his sandwich, considered it, and ate the rest himself. Behind him, nobody spoke for a moment. "You," Brot said finally, threw food at it. "I redirected its attention," Darren said. "It wasn't hunting us. It was defending its territory. We walked into its range, and it responded the way a territorial animal responds. Once I stepped out of its charge line, I wasn't a threat anymore." The food gave it something else to focus on, something that made entering the area worthwhile instead of just alarming. "Its skull could have broken the shuttle door," Brot said. "Yes," Darren agreed. "But it didn't, because we gave it a reason not to." Quell was making notes at a speed his four-handed style allowed to be impressive. "The electromagnetic sensitivity of the species is documented in the old survey logs," he said, almost to himself. "They use it to detect the field signatures of equipment and machinery. That's what triggered the charge, not visual detection. Our scanner emissions." He looked up. "If I reduce the power output on the scanner, it will broadcast a lower field signature." "Do that," Darren said, quietly. Quell adjusted the scanner. The low hum it had been producing dropped to nearly nothing. They moved on. The forest deepened around them. The light grew more amber and more layered, filtered through so many levels of canopy that it arrived at the forest floor almost horizontal. The ground was damp here, not wet but consistently moist, the kind of soil that held a boot print perfectly and released it with a soft sucking sound. Darren watched his own prints appear behind him and found the observation useful. The soil was soft enough that anything heavy would leave a clear trail. He found the Ridgeback Stalker's trail 7 minutes later. Not the animal itself. The trail. Large four-toed prints, deep and broad, pressed into the soft ground with the rolling gait of something that walked its territory on its own schedule and had no reason to hurry. The prints were fresh, no more than 2 hours old based on the moisture in the edges. They were moving in a direction that would intersect with the team's current path about 40 meters ahead. Darren stopped and looked at the prints for a long time. "Something large," Pale said, from behind him. "Something very large," Darren said. "Bear category. Apex predator. See the stride length? Long, relaxed, no hesitation at obstacles. This animal is completely comfortable here. This is the center of its range." He straightened up. "We need to move slowly and make sure it sees us before we see it." "Why?" Brot said. "Would we want it to see us?" "Because if it doesn't see us coming and we appear suddenly, it startles and it attacks. If it sees us coming from a distance, it gets to assess us. It gets to decide what we are. A threat, prey, or something it hasn't seen before that doesn't behave like either." He looked at Brot. "We want to be the third thing." They moved forward slowly, and Darren made himself visible, walking in a clear line without crouching or hiding, letting the forest know where he was. He was aware that this went against every instinct a smaller creature might have in the presence of a larger one. But hiding told a predator you were prey. He had learned this, or rather his species had learned it, across a very long time and a very steep education. The Ridgeback Stalker was 45 meters ahead when it turned its head and looked at them. It was large, bear-shaped, but the shoulder and neck ridges were built differently, layered in overlapping bony plates beneath the fur, and those plates were edged in bioluminescent tissue that was currently glowing a deep, pulsing orange. An orange that deepened as the animal stared at them, becoming something that was close to red. Its eyes were gold and very still. Brot had his weapon out again. It was out before Darren had time to say anything. "Holster it," Darren said, without looking back. His voice was very quiet. "Right now, if it sees that weapon raised, we move from unknown to threat. Holster it." A long 2 seconds passed. Then he heard the sound of the weapon going back into its housing. Darren stood where he was and made himself as easy to look at as possible. He did not advance. He did not retreat. He let the stalker look at him for as long as it needed to, standing in the amber light with his hands at his sides and his field bag hanging from his shoulder. And he looked back at the animal not with challenge and not with fear, but with the simple acknowledgement of one creature that has noticed another. The stalker's ridges stayed orange. It was still deciding. Darren lowered himself to one knee, very slowly, reducing his height, making himself less tall, less dominant in silhouette. He kept his eyes on the animal, but softened his gaze, looking near it rather than directly at it. The ridges pulsed. Orange. Then a lighter orange. Then something that was almost amber. Then, by small degrees, fading toward the animal's resting color, a cool pale blue that was nearly invisible against its dark fur. The stalker looked at the group for another long moment. Then it turned its enormous head back toward the forest, took 3 unhurried steps between 2 wide trees, and was gone. Not fleeing, not driven off, just finished with its assessment and satisfied with the conclusion. The forest settled back around the space where it had been. Nobody said anything for nearly 15 seconds. Then Civi's recording pad made a small automatic chime as it reached a storage threshold and began compressing files. She looked at it. She looked at where the stalker had been. She looked at Darren, who was standing up and brushing leaf matter off his knee. 2 kilometers, he said, glancing at his wrist unit. We're past 2 kilometers in, further than anyone on record. He picked up his field bag and swung it back over his shoulder. Commander Pale, if you want to collect those botanical samples, there should be a good variety of ground-level growth another 300 meters ahead, based on the moisture gradient. Pale looked at the place in the trees where the stalker had disappeared. Yes, she said. Her voice had something different in it now. Not the tight, controlled calm she had been using since the shuttle landed. Something closer to genuine curiosity. Lead the way. Darren led the way. Quell fell into step beside him, scanner humming low and quiet, reading the forest instead of fearing it. Above them in the canopy, the crystal-feathered birds moved through the high branches like slow light. The amber forest went on, deep and old and full of things that the rest of the galaxy had looked at from the outside for 400 years and decided to call forbidden. Darren thought it was one of the finest places he had ever walked through. He reached into his bag to check how many sandwiches he had left. 3. That was enough. The dry riverbed appeared without warning, the way things in deep forest always do, where the dense undergrowth parts, and suddenly the ground drops away, and you are looking at a wide channel of pale smooth stones running between soft banks of pale earth. The stones were old and dry, and the river that had carved them was long gone. But water was still present somewhere below the surface because the vegetation on both banks was richer than anywhere the team had passed through. Deep fern beds and broad leaf-ground plants, and the twisted root structures of trees that were drinking from depth. Darren stepped down onto the stones and crouched to look at the channel. The rock's surface had a scatter of prints crossing it in several directions, different sizes, different species. He read them the way someone reads a notice board, quickly and with recognition. Good crossing point, he said. Lots of species use this, which means it's probably safe. He stood up and looked along the channel in both directions. Move across together, no stragglers, keep close. Commander Pale stepped down after him. Then Quell, then Civi, then Brat, who landed on the stones with a sound like something heavy being set down very firmly. They were halfway across when the first sound reached them. It was low, very low, below the comfortable range of hearing, more felt than heard, a vibration that entered through the feet and traveled upward through the chest and settled somewhere behind the eyes. It had no clear direction. It seemed to come from the forest on both sides at once. Quell stopped walking. He pressed his hand to his chest, as if checking his own heartbeat. "What is that?" he said, and his voice came out wrong, slightly disconnected, like a signal with interference. Darren recognized it. The recognition was immediate and cold and instructive all at once. "Wolves," he said. "Don't run. Do not run. Get close together and get low." The pack wolves appeared from the tree line on both banks at the same time. 6 on the left bank, 5 on the right. They were the size of large dogs, but built leaner, with longer legs and narrow faces and ears that rotated independently like small satellite dishes. Their fur was dark gray, and their chests were visibly vibrating as they produced the resonance sound that was not quite a howl and not quite a hum, but somewhere between the two. A coordinated low-frequency broadcast that the 11 of them were generating together in a careful, structured pattern. Quell sat down on the stones. Not deliberately. His legs simply stopped cooperating. The infrasound had found the frequency that disrupted his inner balance, and his body had made a decision without consulting him. He pressed both pairs of hands flat to the riverbed stones. Brought made a sound and grabbed the nearest tree root at the bank edge, holding himself upright with the focused effort of someone fighting a current. His eyes were wide and his face was tight. Commander Pale was still standing, but the scanner she had taken from Quell was shaking in her grip, and she could not seem to make it stop. She looked at it, and then looked at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. Sivy had sat down too. Her recording pad was still raised. She was still recording. Her jaw was not clicking. Her jaw had stopped moving entirely. Darren was affected. He felt it clearly, a wobble in his equilibrium, a slight buzzing displacement behind his eyes, the early edge of nausea. His vision was stable, but the space between his ears felt like it was filling with something dense and pressurized. He planted his feet on the stones, wider apart, and breathed steadily and focused on what he could feel physically, the weight of his boots, the field bag on his shoulder, the texture of the stone through his soles. He looked at the wolves. 11 animals, positioned at both banks. The formation was deliberate, not the random placement of a chaotic ambush, but a structured arrangement, an encirclement. They were watching the group with alert, intelligent eyes, their ears forward and tracking every sound and movement. They were not snarling. They were not advancing. They were broadcasting their sound and watching to see what it produced. Darren thought about what he knew about infrasound in pack hunters on Earth. Wolves did not use it, but tigers did. And there were species in the deep ocean that used resonance to disorient prey. And the principle was always the same. A frequency that disrupted the prey's ability to flee or resist without requiring any physical contact. An elegant, energy-efficient technique. He thought, these animals are not using this on me the way a tool is used. They are using it on the group the way a question is asked. He thought, what would a correct answer look like? He understood, slowly, that the formation was not random in another way. The wolves were not looking at the entire group with equal attention. Several of them were looking specifically at an area of the left bank downstream, at a point roughly 20 meters past where the group stood. Their attention kept returning there, briefly and deliberately, the way a person's eyes return to something they want you to notice without pointing at it directly. Darren forced his eyes left along the bank and found it. Partly concealed by an overhang of fern root and shadow was a shape he would not have seen if he had not been specifically looking for it. Long and pale. Very still. A pale crawler, the ambush predator from Civy's survey files. Translucent-skinned, its body heat low enough that it was nearly invisible, only the outline visible where it displaced the shadow. It was positioned facing the stones where the group stood. It had been there before the wolves arrived. It had been waiting. The wolves had come to run it out of their territory. The group had walked directly into the middle of the situation. Darren felt the infrasound pressing at his thinking and ignored it the best he could. He turned to face the left bank where the larger wolf contingent stood, 6 animals watching him with patient intelligence, and he did something that had no tactical manual behind it and no certain outcome. He opened his mouth and made a sound. Not words, not mimicry. He produced the closest thing he could physically generate to a low, sustained, steady vocalization, a long open sound from the chest that was calm and non-aggressive and submissive in its inflection. Not a challenge, not a cry of distress. A sound that said, in whatever register animal communication operated in, I am here. I am not a threat. I see you. I am not running. The wolves' resonance dropped by perhaps a third in volume almost immediately. The ones on the left bank shifted their stances, ears rotating to catch his sound more precisely. Darren reached into his bag and removed the piece of jerky he had packed for himself for the afternoon. He held it out in his open palm, low and forward, the way he would offer something to a dog that did not know him yet. One of the wolves on the left bank separated from the others. The largest one. It crossed the stones toward him unhurriedly, its ears forward, its eyes on his face. It stopped 2 feet away and looked at his hand. It could smell the food clearly. It could also smell him clearly, and it was taking time to process both pieces of information. Then it took the jerky from his palm, teeth barely brushing his skin, and stepped back. It ate the food without looking away from him. The resonance sound stopped. 11 wolves on 2 banks looked at each other, and then at the pale crawler on the left bank. The crawler, whose ambush had been entirely disrupted, slowly drew back into the fern's shadow, and retreated along the bank. The wolves watched it go, and when it was gone, they lost interest in the riverbed entirely. They moved back into the trees on both sides, unhurried, without ceremony, finished with the situation. The dry stones were empty again. Quell got slowly to his feet, one hand still on the riverbed for balance. Brought released the tree root. Pale put the shaking scanner down at her side. Sibby lowered her recording pad and looked at it, and then at Darren. Nobody spoke for long enough that the forest sounds had time to come back, birds and insects and the soft movement of air through the high canopy. They were not hunting us, Commander Pale said. Her voice was very careful. No, Darren said. They were moving a competing predator out of their territory. We happened to be standing in the middle of it. He looked along the bank where the crawler had retreated. The crawler had been waiting at that ambush point before we got here. The wolves came in to drive it off. Their encirclement and the resonance was directed at the crawler, not us. We were just caught between them. The sound affected us, Brat said, massaging one temple with two thick fingers. It affected me too, Darren said. Infrasound is a broad-spectrum tool. It doesn't discriminate. He paused. But it's not lethal. It's disorienting. The prey response is to freeze or run. If you run, the wolves redirect attention. If you freeze, the crawler gets what it wants. He looked at his hand, still slightly open from where he had offered the food. If you respond calmly, you give both parties enough information to figure out that you are neither what they came here for. Pale looked at him with an expression that was complex. Not quite awe and not quite horror, and not quite the cautious respect of a commanding officer for an unexpectedly capable subordinate, but something that had elements of all three. Did your world have creatures like this? She asked. Exactly like this? Not exactly, Darren said, but close enough. We had pack hunters that used frequency for coordination. We had ambush predators that used cold metabolic rates to reduce their heat signature. He thought about it. We had an entire class of very large, very dangerous animals that every generation had to learn to understand instead of just running from. And they stopped being dangerous? Quell asked. Darren shook his head. No, they're still dangerous, but we stopped being ignorant about them. He picked up his field bag and checked the stones ahead for the far bank. There's a difference. He walked to the far bank and climbed up into the trees, and one by one the alien crew followed him, stepping carefully over the smooth, pale stones of the dry riverbed where, 3 minutes ago, 11 wolves had formed a circle around them and asked a question in the only language they had. Darren had answered it. Sibby filed her recording under a new category that she created on the spot and labeled simply, "Things humans understand that we do not." She suspected the file was going to get very large before the day was over. The trees thinned without announcing it, and then there was light. Not the filtered amber of the deep forest, but real open light, the kind that falls into a clearing and spreads across it without obstruction, the kind that makes the air itself look pale and clean. The team stopped at the tree line and looked at what was in front of them, and none of them, not even Darren, said anything for a moment. The clearing was wide, wider than the shuttle that had brought them to the surface, wider than the survey vessel above them was long. At its center was a low depression where water gathered in a dark, still pool fed from some underground source below the root line. The ground around the pool was worn smooth, not by weather but by consistent use, the compressed soil of a place where large animals had come for a very long time. The vegetation at the clearing edges was rich and varied, exactly the kind of ground-level botanical range the Commission survey had specified, and none of it had ever been documented because no survey team had ever reached it. Along the far edge of the clearing, half buried beneath decades of vine growth and encroaching forest floor, were walls. Straight ones, the kind that do not occur naturally. Darren looked at the ruins and then looked at the clearing. Both things were important, but the clearing demanded attention first, because the clearing was occupied. The Ridgeback stalker was on the eastern side, lying with its massive body stretched along a warm shelf of exposed rock, its bioluminescent ridges dim and cool in the resting color that Darren had now learned to read as neutral. Two of them, a pair, resting within 3 meters of each other with the comfortable proximity of animals that had lived together for years. At the northern edge, near the richer vegetation, a family group of root boars was moving through the undergrowth, for adults and several smaller ones, eating with the focused, unhurried concentration of animals that felt completely safe here. Their electromagnetic sensors were working. Darren could tell from the way they occasionally paused and oriented toward the ruins, reading the residual field signature of whatever electronics were still inside. Old readings they clearly recognized and had stopped finding alarming long ago. Above, the canopy that enclosed the clearing's edges was threaded with the crystal-winged birds, settled and quiet, their feathers catching the open light and throwing small scattered reflections across the clearing floor like fragments of the sky. And to the south, the pack wolves. 5 of them, not the full pack, a resting group near the water pool, heads on paws, ears moving independently to track the sounds of the clearing even in sleep. Every animal species they had encountered today was present, together, in the same space, at the same time, using the same water source and the same warmth and the same ancient clearing with the easy comfort of things that had found a balance among themselves over a very long time. 5 kilometers in, Quell said, very quietly, looking at the reading on his wrist unit. We are 5 kilometers inside the Forbidden Beast Forest. He said it the way someone says a number that does not feel real yet. Darren looked at the clearing for a few more seconds, watching the stalkers breathe, watching the boars eat, watching the wolves sleep. Then he walked out of the tree line and into the open light. He did not hurry and he did not hide. He moved at the same pace he had been moving at for hours, the pace of something that belonged to the space it occupied. He angled his path to avoid the stalker's direct sight line and give the boar family enough room to notice him and assess him without feeling pressed. He kept his face slightly down and his body language open. No sharp movements, no direct challenges. The stalkers raised their heads when he came into the clearing. Their ridges brightened fractionally, from the resting pale blue to something slightly warmer, watchful rather than alarmed. One of them held its gaze on Darren for a long, measuring moment, the gold eyes patient and precise, and Darren moved past the edge of their rock shelf at an angle that was respectful without being fearful, neither prey nor rival, just another presence in the shared space. The stalker put its head back down. The boars registered him with a sweep of their snouts and went back to eating. The wolves did not even open their eyes, though their ears tracked him for a few seconds and then went still. Darren reached the ruins at the far edge of the clearing and stopped. He looked at the wall in front of him, at the Survey Commission identifier stamp still partially readable on the uppermost exposed stone, at the collapsed section of roof beyond it, at the vine-threaded darkness inside the open doorway. Behind him, he heard careful footsteps and turned to see Commander Pale walking across the clearing. She moved with concentration, deliberate and slow, watching the animals with the careful attention of a person who is learning a new skill in real time. Quell came next, scanner held low and quiet, eyes everywhere. Civvy last, recording pad up, jaw still, completely absorbed. Brod had stopped just inside the tree line and stood there with his arms folded and his face doing the complex work of someone who is updating a large number of assumptions simultaneously. Survey post, Pale said, stopping beside Darren at the wall. Old one. Darren ran his fingers along the edge of the commission stamp. This style of construction was discontinued at least 250 years ago. Whatever team built this, they built it to stay. They went inside. The interior was a single large room. The roof collapsed inward at one end, but intact at the other, and the intact section was dim and dry and preserved in the way of places that have simply been left alone for a very long time. Survey equipment still sat on the processing tables, old models, solid and durable, built to last in field conditions. Data storage units were racked along the inner wall, the kind that used passive storage requiring no active power, which was why they had survived. Civvy went directly to the storage units with the quiet certainty of an archivist who has found a primary source. She began working on the extraction readers she carried, attaching contact points to the storage units, coaxing power from the survey team's own emergency cells that were still partially charged after 2 centuries of slow discharge. Darren stood in the center of the room and looked at the old equipment around him. Survey tables, sample collection arrays, the same basic design as the ones they carried now. A large display surface on the far wall, still mounted, still intact, dead and dark. There were personal items too. A folded jacket on a chair. A worn map print, hand-annotated, pinned to the wall above a small workspace. A collection of field notebooks stacked neatly beside the data storage rack, which told him that whoever had left this place had left it in order, had taken time to organize and store their materials properly. This was not an emergency evacuation. This was a deliberate departure. He took one of the notebooks from the stack and opened it. The handwriting inside was precise and uniform, the field notes of a careful scientist, dated and organized. He read for a few minutes. Then he read more carefully. "Pale," he said. She came to him, and he held the notebook open for her to read. She read the Thalvery notation without difficulty, and her whisker tips moved steadily as she worked through it. Then she was still. "They used sonic deterrents," she said. "Broad-spectrum noise emitters. High frequency." He turned to the next page. Day 3 of the survey. First contact with the canopy drifters, which the team identified as a potential aerial threat and immediately deployed the emitters against. The drifters reacted. Then the stalkers reacted to the drifters reacting. Then the wolves reacted to the stalker reaction and the root boars stampeded. He turned another page. By the end of Day 3, every species in this section of the forest was in active threat response. The team spent Day 4 barricaded in this building. By Day 5, the forest had not calmed, and their shuttle could not land safely within the clearing due to the animal activity. He looked at the notebook. They were extracted by a hovering vessel at significant cost and significant risk. The survey leader filed the exit report. He turned to the last page of the notes. The final entry was short. He read it aloud. "We attempted to impose safety protocols suited to mechanical or chemical hazards on a biological environment of extraordinary complexity and density. Every measure we took to protect ourselves became a threat signal to one or more species. Every threat signal cascaded into a wider response. We did not understand the system we entered, and our tools were designed for systems we did understand. I am recommending closure of this survey site indefinitely. This world's interior is beyond the reach of standard survey methodology. We leave these notes for any future team that may attempt what we could not complete." The room was quiet. Through the open doorway, the clearing was visible, and in it the stalkers slept on their warm rock, and the boar family moved through the vegetation, and the wolves breathed at the water pool edge, and the crystal birds moved through the light above it all. Civi's reader chimed. The data cores were transferring. Decades of this team's work, the ecological surveys, the atmospheric readings, the species documentation they had managed to complete before things went wrong, all of it extracting in ordered sequences after 200 years of silence. They had the right data, Quell said. He was looking at the map on the wall, the one with the hand-drawn annotations. The species documentation is detailed, accurate. They identified the behavior patterns. They had the information to understand what they were dealing with. But they didn't trust it enough to put the emitters down, Darren said. He set the notebook back on the stack, carefully aligned with the others. He looked at the jacket on the chair. He looked at the map. He thought about a team of scientists who had come to this place with the best equipment available to them, and the best intentions, and the deep, reasonable fear of creatures they did not know how to read, and had made the one choice that turned possibility into catastrophe. He did not feel superior to them. He felt something more complicated than that, a kind of sorrow for the 4 centuries of wasted distance, the 61 teams that had looked at this forest from the outside and turned away, all because the first team had made one wrong call, and the warning had echoed down through the galactic database, unchallenged ever since. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody had asked what exactly had gone wrong, or whether a different approach might produce a different outcome. The word forbidden had done its work and done it thoroughly. He picked up his field bag and took out the last sandwich. He ate it slowly, standing in the doorway of the ancient survey post, looking out at the clearing where the most feared ecosystem in 4 centuries of galactic record was going about its ordinary afternoon in the ordinary way of animals that are simply alive and wish to remain so. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, it wasn't beyond them. It was just unfamiliar. Pale heard him. She stood beside him in the doorway and looked at the same clearing. Yes, she said, after a moment. I think you are right. The data cores finished their transfer with a second soft chime. Civi carefully disconnected her readers and packed the storage units with the precise, reverent handling of someone transporting something irreplaceable. Outside, the forest held its breath and did not hold it. The pale margin had been in orbit for 9 hours before the commission relay station acknowledged the transmission. That delay was unusual. Standard acknowledgement came within 2. The crew knew what the delay meant. Someone on the relay end had read the incoming report header, seen the survey location, and gone to find his supervisor. Darren was in the small crew lounge with his field notebook open and a cup of coffee cooling beside him when Commander Pale came in and sat down across from him. "The commission has flagged our report for secondary review," she said. Darren did not look up from his notebook. He was writing the behavioral profile for the Ridgeback stalker, working from memory and from the notes he had made in the field, filling in the gaps with inference clearly labeled as inference. "Good scientific practice." "How secondary?" he asked. "The director of survey operations has been looped in," Pale said, "and the chair of the Varith 6 Planetary Committee, and the head of the Xenobiological Hazard Board." Darren looked up. "3 directors," Pale said, "because our report describes 5 kilometers of successful interior survey in the Forbidden Beast Forest, with full species interaction documentation, in a single day, with no casualties, no injuries, and no vehicle damage." She paused. "The last entry in the Varith 6 forest record before ours was filed 209 years ago. It was marked incomplete due to the team's emergency extraction." Darren nodded slowly. "And they think our data is contaminated." "The senior review officer used the phrase instrument malfunction," Pale said. In his initial query, he suggested that an equipment fault during atmospheric entry might have produced false positive readings across our survey dataset. Darren put his pen down. "He thinks we made up 5 kilometers of botanical samples and 3 major fauna behavioral profiles because our instruments glitched on the way in. He thinks it is more likely than the alternative," Pale said. There was a silence. From down the corridor came the sound of Civi working in the archive room, the soft mechanical sorting of her organization systems as she prepared the day's recordings for formal submission. "Send them Civi's footage," Darren said. Pale nodded. "I already requested her to prepare the archive package. It will take some time." She recorded continuously from planetary approach to shuttle re-entry. She tilted her head slightly. "That is approximately 9 hours of footage." "They can start with the clearing," Darren said. "The part where both stalkers, the Boar family, the Drifters, and the Wolf Pack are all visible in the same frame, while I'm standing in the middle of it, eating a sandwich." Pale's whisker tips moved in the Thalvery expression that was closest to dry amusement. "Yes," she said. "I thought that section might be persuasive." The archive package took 4 hours to compress and transmit. Civi had organized it by species interaction, with time-stamped scene indexes and a summary document that cross-referenced every recorded behavioral event with the relevant entry from the old survey post's notebook data. She had also included Quell's continuous scanner readings with a technical annotation explaining his adjustment to reduce electromagnetic field output and its effect on root Boar aggression response. And she had included, at the end, the final notebook entry from the old survey team's leader, 200 years old, recorded in the original handwriting and read aloud by Darren on camera in the survey post doorway. The commission relay station received the full package. The response time was 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it came, it was addressed to Commander Pale directly rather than to the standard ship's log. It read, "Commander Pale, the survey footage from the Pale margin has been reviewed at the directorial level. The data is being accepted as valid pending final verification. A formal session of the Varith 6 Planetary Committee has been convened for next rotation. Your crew's full attendance is requested via relay. The committee has also submitted a secondary inquiry, filed personally by Director Oren of the Hazard Classification Board. The inquiry is as follows, and I am quoting the director's exact words. Is the human crew member's behavior in the submitted footage representative of standard human practice, or is this individual an anomaly within his species?" Pale read the message twice. Then she walked down the corridor to the archive room, where Civi was still organizing, and handed her the reader. Civi read it and looked up. "He wants to know if Darren is normal," Civi said. "In essence," Pale said. "Yes." They both looked at the reader for a moment. Then Civi went back to the lounge with Pale, and they both stood in the doorway and looked at Darren, who had not moved from his chair in the last 2 hours. He had finished the stalker profile and was now writing the pack wolf entry. occasionally checking the field recording Civi had sent to his personal unit, pausing the footage to study a specific posture or position before continuing his notes. His coffee was entirely cold. He had not noticed. "Darren," Pale said. He said, not looking up. "Director Oren of the Hazard Classification Board wants to know if you are a normal human being." Darren paused his writing. He thought about this for a moment with the genuine seriousness of a person considering an honest question. "Mostly," he said. "I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid. My grandfather was a field biologist. I did my survey training on Earth's reserve continent, which has some territories that are still, properly wild." He considered further. "But the basic stuff, the behavioral reading, the body language, the not running from things principle, that's not unusual. Most humans learn some version of that growing up. We just have a long history with large animals." Pale looked at him for a moment. "How long?" Darren finally put his pen down and looked up. He thought about the question the way he thought about the stalker's ridge colors, with patient attention to what the answer actually contained. "As long as we've been human," he said. "Before that, even. We evolved alongside megafauna. We hunted some of it. Some of it hunted us. We were in those forests, the ones with the very large and very dangerous things, for hundreds of thousands of years before we built anything that could protect us from them." He picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, and set it back down. "We had to learn the language of the animals, or we didn't survive. It's not something we think about consciously. It's just part of what we are." The room was quiet. "Your species," Civi said slowly, "has been reading the behavior of apex predators for hundreds of thousands of years." "More or less," Darren said. "Some people are better at it than others. But the fundamental literacy is pretty widespread." Civi looked at her recording pad. She opened the file she had labeled "Things Humans Understand That We Do Not" and added a note. Then she looked at the file size and added another label underneath the first. "This explains a significant number of other things as well." Pale went to her office and composed her reply to Director Oren. She wrote it 3 times, because the first 2 versions felt either too technical or too informal for the weight of what she was trying to say. The third version, the one she sent, read as follows. "Director Oren, in response to your inquiry regarding the human crew member Darren Cole, his capabilities as demonstrated during today's survey are within the normal parameters of human field experience. He is an experienced xenobiologist and survey specialist, but the foundational skills he applied today, the capacity to interpret megafauna behavior, to signal non-aggression through posture and movement, to read territorial and threat patterns and respond appropriately, are not rare human traits. They are common ones. The human species evolved on a world with large predators and has coexisted with them for an extremely long period. This coexistence appears to have produced a baseline behavioral literacy regarding dangerous fauna that other species do not share. I believe this literacy is why Mr. Cole could walk through the forbidden beast forest, and also why the forest was forbidden to everyone else. The creatures in that forest are not unmanageable. They are simply animals. We had never, before today, sent someone who knew how to talk to them." She read it once more. Then she sent it. Down in the crew lounge, Darren finished the Packwolf profile and closed his field notebook. He stood up and stretched and carried his cold coffee to the kitchen and put the cup in the cleaning unit. Then he went to the storage locker where he kept his field supplies and began checking his inventory for the follow-up survey that the commission would almost certainly authorize once the footage had fully circulated. He made a note to pack more jerky. Below, on the surface of Varith 6, the amber light was deepening into evening across the northern continent. The great trees of the Forbidden Beast forest moved in a wind that came in long, slow waves from the western coast, and the leaves spoke in a sound that was not quite a whisper and not quite a hiss, something in between that the crystal-winged birds in the upper canopy rode without waking. At the edge of the warm rock shelf in the clearing, the larger ridgeback stalker raised its heavy head and held it for a moment, looking at the sky where a small light moved in a slow arc among the stars. The ship in orbit, circling the same way it had circled the night before, too high to smell and too distant to hear, just a light that moved in a pattern it had learned to recognize. Something about the light was different from the other lights that had come before it and gone away. The other lights had always left quickly and did not return. This one was still there. The stalker watched it for a few seconds longer. Then it put its head back down on the warm rock, its ridges the cool, steady pale blue of an animal that has looked at something and found it, on balance, acceptable. The light moved on in its slow arc. The forest held the night around it like something it had been keeping safe for a very long time, waiting for someone who knew enough to deserve it. It had waited 400 years. One afternoon had been enough.